Hello friends, this is Ashton. I hope you can see me in the camera here. So in today's video, I'm going to do the part B for this CRUD application. So this is the application we did in the part A. So in part A, we achieved something like this. So basically we have a table or a tab here in a Google Sheet here. We have about 100 record for a customer, and we build an application to read the data from the backend, and we display the data, so 15 items per page. So as you can see here, if I change to page 2, it should bring the data for the second page and page 3. So similar things like this, and all in the part A, we basically build a basic structure for this application. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to create a form. So basically, we are focused on the C part. So basically, create. We're going to complete this part for this video. And at the end of the video, we should be able to create a new item from this application and send it to the backend and insert a new record in our database. Okay, so let's get started. And let me close the application here in this file and the database, no change. And let me rename this because this is for part A. And I'd like to start with a copy of part A, and we can work on our part B. So if you haven't watched my part A video, I suggest you to go through their video first, because in part A it covers the basics. Okay, so this is part B. So our main target here is to create a form which is going to basically submit the data to our backend. Okay, so the first step here we need to create a form. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to use some components. So I'm not sure if you are familiar with Vue. I think Vue.org. So basically we can split the form in small pieces. So basically every input we can design it as a component, and a form is also consists of many form input, like a text input or a select input or something like that. So with Vue we can create our components very easily, and let me show you how to create a component, and we can use these components to build our customer form. Okay, so let's go to the documentation and go to, I think it's called components. Okay, you have the components basics. So basically we can register our components with a template. Okay, and this is the component name. Okay, like button counter. So basically I'd like to create a new file here, and remember we need to use the HTML file for all the front end code. And for the name, I'd like to rename it Vue and Vue. Okay, so this Vue is French and this Vue is English. Okay, and components. So basically I'm going to put all my components in this file. Okay, so I like to separate the file a little bit. If you put them in one single file, it's very difficult to manage. Okay, so also we have a script tag here. And before we start to work on this part, I'd like to link this file to our index file. So we have a function here called link. Okay, remember this function? So I'd like to link here after our Vue.js a script tag here. So we'd like to link it here. So call this link function. And the file name we'd like to link, which is vue/vue, and com components. Make sure no typos here. Let me check it again. Okay, so in this way, we connect, basically we connect this file into this file. Okay, so we can start build our components here in this function. So const. So first of all, I'd like to design a form input component. So this component could be a text input, could be a select drop-downs like that. So let me do this. So I call it view input. So this is just a variable name, and we use view component. So here we are using this structure. Okay. So the view is the class. Okay, we use these components. Make sure this is correct component, and we give it give component a name. So view input, and here we're going to, for the second parameter here is an object. Okay, and here we need to pass some properties here. So first, the first property here in this object is called property, and which takes item property, and the type of this item is an object. Okay, so this item could be like something like this. So we have item, maybe this item is an object. So this item is equal to something like, we have a name, or we have ID, like for, let's say for this customer, we have a name, right? We have a name, not the name. We have an ID. So this is the ID for this customer. Because this is input, for this input, we may have an input for the name. So we give it ID of name, okay? And give it a label for this form input. So let's say name. And we can add a placeholder if you like. So enter the name, enter the client name, something like that. Okay, so this is going to be the item object. So this item could be a field for the name. It could also be another field for the description, or email, or phone, or address, or city, states. So it could be any of these items here. Okay, so this is item object. And then we need to define a template here. So this template is basically the HTML content. So we need to grab some Bootstrap code here. So go to Bootstrap. We are using the Bootstrap 5.0 here. Okay, you can use other versions. So here I'd like to grab this part, so which is this part. Okay, if you can see it, it's something like this. Basically a form input, I have a label, and I have an input. Okay, so let's copy this code and put it here. But we need to modify something here. So first of all, I'd like to get rid of this margin, because I don't want to apply the margin here. I'd like to apply the margin when we are trying to use this input. So I'd like to replace this for to, so with item.id. So this is ID. Okay, we basically pass this, we get the ID from this item object, and set it here for this for, and here for this ID also I like to set it to item.id. So basically you need to do it like this, and form label, this is class, no need to change. And for this email address, I'd like to get the label from the item object. Okay, label from the item, and the type, we also can use item.type. Okay, so this is for ID, and the label caption, and for the input, type, class, ID, and this is a placeholder. Let's get the placeholder from the item placeholder. Okay, so this is the input. I don't know if you I know if you don't know anything about view, this is a little confusing, I think, but you will get it finally. Okay, so let me show you what I'm doing here. So right now, let me create a form here, form data here. Let's say const customer form data is equal to an object, and here we have a name property here, and this name is basically an item in this form. Okay, so this form, this name property here, we're going to assign it with the ID of name and give it a label. So this is the label going to be the name with a capital N, and the placeholder, I don't want to place any placeholders. So if you want to add a placeholder, you can add it, add a type. So basically this is the type of the input. So by default it should be text, and I'd like to add a value properties here. So basically this is the value we're going to use. So by default it's null. Okay, so for now I think it's enough. We have the ID, we have the type, and we have the ID, this is ID, we have the placeholder, and the most important thing I'd like to bind, so vModel is equal to the item.value. So basically I'm binding the item value to this input. Okay, so this is the input. It's just a very quick demo here, and this is basically a component. Okay, so basically we can pass any variables here. So maybe I have to create another one, so maybe another field item for this form. Let's say we have an email field. Okay, so I'd like to change this to email because this is an input for email, and ID, let's change it to email, and for the type and the label also change it to email. So in this way we can update, we can create object, and we can do a form very easily. So let's create the form component. So let's say this is the new customer form. Okay, so view.component, and let's rename it new customer form. So just need to pick a name you will remember later if you're trying to use it. So basically this form is going to use to create a new customer. So, and it's the same way, since we are going to use this v-input component in our component, in this component. So basically this is like a parent and this is a child. Okay, so let's first I'd like to bring the components, which is an object, and view v-input. So this is the name for this component, and this is the instance, which is this view input we created here. Okay, so this is the only components we're going to use, and in the same way we're going to have the props. So for the props we're going to have a form, okay, which is also an object. So this form is basically we're going to assign this data, this custom form data, into this form props property. Okay, this form property, and then here we have a template. So this template we can have a form here. Okay, and I'd like to apply a class for this form. So a class, and this is let's say this is a row class with a class row, so we can lay out our form a little bit easier. So we can give it a div here, and I'll give it a class of column. So by default, let's say it takes 12 columns, and for the small screen, I say we take 6. Okay. So this is first item in this first input in this form, so which is the name. So we can use this v dash input component here, and this component, remember, which takes one property, which is the item property. So we need to pass the item, okay, and the first item here, which is from this property, okay, this form property. So form dot name. So this name is defined here. Okay, so this is the components for this v input, and at the last we need to close these components. So this basically you can use it like this. Okay, like this. Okay, and this works fine. It's also working. It's just like an image tag. Okay, but this tag is defined by us. Okay, so basically this is components we are using. So we can make a copy of this item and put it here, and we only need to change this to email. And in this way, we have this form created with two components in this form right now, but we can add more. And this is just a very quick demo to show you how to build a form with Vue.js. So it's just very, I think it is a little bit organized then, and then you only need to manipulate the data here. So it's organized a little bit. So right now we have the components created in our project, but we need to add it. We need to use it in our main code, which is this index file. So if you remember, we have this. This is for the pagination, if you see. So I'd like to temporarily hide them, okay, add a class dnone. So basically I add a class called dnone to hide them so we don't see them right now, because I want to focus on the form part right now. So let's give a div here, and we'd like to create a v, not v, customer, or not customer, new customer form. And we need to pass a form property and the form data. So the data we're going to pass is a new form, not new form, new customer form data. Okay, make sure the name here is correct. Let me check it again. So, okay, there is no new, so this is called customer form data. Okay, so let's make a copy of this and go back to my file. All right, and the final step, we need to go to the Vue.js index file. We need to add this data here in the data object, okay? Because this is our main new app here. If you didn't add the data here, you cannot use it in your component, okay? So let's try it. I hope everything can work. So let's try to do a new deployment, because this is a copy of the project of the part A. Okay, so let's call it for dev and me anyone web application deploy. So this is the first revision. We only need to do this for once, I think, for this development. Okay, authorize the access. So by the way, if you're not familiar with Vue, I think it's a little bit difficult for you to understand this. But I'm not showing you how to use Vue. And if you're trying to use Vue in Google Apps Script, I suggest you to take some lessons a lot of view tutorial on YouTube, I have to say. I also learned it from YouTube and trying to use it with Google Apps Script. It is very fun, I have to say. So we now have the app deployed, and let's open the test or development URL here. So I hope everything works fine if I see this title with no errors. So let's open the console to make sure everything works fine. Okay, so you remember I choose to hide because I had a class here for the D9, so it's hide the tables, hide the table and the pagination, and only show us the form. But it seems like the form is not laid out very good because I think I applied to class. Let me check. So column. Okay, so this is not a class. This is class with the three S's. This is pretty bad. So if I change it to the correct class, I should have two columns, one for the name and one for the email. If we have screen size like this, but if we have screen size very small, so right now it's laid out like this. So name, email. So it looks fine. So let's complete the first part, the name, description, email. So I'd like to add a select box, a select drop-down for the cities and states, something like that. So just to show you, we can add a select drop-down box like that. Okay. So first of all, maybe we'd like to define our data, form data first. So let's add it here. I think most of them should be the copy-paste of work. So description, we have a description ID, description, the type, let's say text area. So we can handle things like this. Basically, we can add a text area for the description if you like. Okay. So anything else? We have a phone. So let's make a copy of this email and rename this phone, email to phone, and the type is called tel. So basically telephone, okay, short for tel. And else, anything, address, city, states, okay. Let's make a copy very quickly. So this part is very easy, but it just needs time to do it. Form, address, maybe we can do it like this one, text area, form, not form, label, address, and city. So for this city, I'd like to add city, label is city, and let's say this type is select, okay. And so for select, we need to have some items you need to select. Maybe I say options, and we should have a list of items. So basically we add array here. So let's say Shenzhen, and let's say New York, so any city, and maybe where, Osaka or Okasa, okay, maybe Tokyo, I don't know, any cities I can remember, Paris, okay, so I think it's enough. So this is for city, and for the states, it's going to be country. So it's basically the same data structure, okay, state, and it's also a select. Let's say this is China. China is not a state. Okay, it doesn't matter. Basically, I'm showing you the basically this state could be the country. Okay, say Japan. not a big deal. France or Hungary. I don't know if this is correct. I believe this Hungary is wrong. Okay, so this is the data we need to use. So this is a customer form data. All the form data are added here. We want to input. So this ID we're going to be generated automatically. So we don't need to put an ID here from the front end. Okay, but we can add ID here. Just to show you, we can add ID here. Okay, so this is ID, text, and you also can pass a disable true. So we can add a lot of stuff here just to show you how to do a little bit of a customization. So if we have a disable, and then we need to add it here. So basically, if it's disabled, we can add a disable here. Item.disabled, disabled. So in this way, we can apply the styles. If it's disabled, this field is disabled, something like that, you can see, or something like the form validation. If you want to validate if this item is required or not, you can do things like this. Okay, so for the just to simplify this project a little bit, so I don't want to do any form validation here because it just needs time to do it, I have to say. So so you notice that we now have different types of form input. So for the text, but we here in these components, we only handled the default, which is the text form input. So we'd like to check here. What if the input is a select? Okay, so we need to check the if type, not type, item.type is equal to select. So if the type is the select, we cannot use the input element here, right? We need to use a select because we are trying to use a drop down for this item. Okay, so in this case, we need to bring the option for this select, right? Remember, we have options here in this item for city and state. So if this select is let's say it's a select, and we can copy this, all of them, because we're going to use all of these attributes except placeholder, we don't need it, and disable, we also need to use it. Let me check if anything else. I think that's it. We have the model bind the item value to this select, and the only thing we need to do here, we need to add the options, right? And let's say v4. Basically, we're going to loop through all the options in this options list, right? So v4 option in options, not options, item.options, because options is in this item object. And I'd like to get the index because we have to pass a key for this option element, and we only pass the index here, should be fine. And for the caption or for the inner text for this option, we pass the option here, and we also need to add a value attribute to this option element, so which is also the option. So if the caption of this option or the inner text of this option is different from this option value, maybe the display value is like ABC and your actual value is 1, 2, 3, something like that. So you need to change change it a little bit. Okay, so maybe you can pass something like a key value pair. Maybe you say China, maybe the text is China, but the actual value is CN, like this. Okay, so for now, let's just keep it simple. Let's assume the display value is actually the value itself. Okay, so this value is actually the same value. So this is about how to handle the select. If the type is select, we return this part. And what if the type is text area? So we copy this line of code. So this is for the text area. Okay, so let's go back to our code. And I'd like to add another section here. Let's format it a little bit. So I don't need to have this line here because the label is already added. So this is for the label, and this is text area class, no change, ID. You know what? I only need to keep the row 3. So you even can pass the rows. Okay, you can say item.rows or something like that. So if it's a text, so description, I need to pass a rows, so which is 3. So if you want to 2 row, you can change it here in the property. Okay, so let's add it for another text area. I think it's for the address. So maybe let's say 4 or 5 rows. So in this way, we added rows to the text area, and we also need to check if. Okay, so let's copy, get rid of this. So we else if. So this is first if, so which is called the if. We have else if here. The type is text area. So if it's text area, we're going to return this text area. Disabled item. So this is class. So this is going to bind the. I think I need to get the placeholder. Okay. So this is for the text area, and the final one here. We need to add a v-else. So if it's not select, so if the item type is not select and is also not text area, for all the other item types, we use input field. Okay, so this is update about this view input component. So this is the magic of how to use the components in Vue. Okay, so it is kind of I don't know how to describe it, but you see the flexibilities here, right? And how to use it in your form. So it's quite simple. You only need to copy, paste. Okay, so let's say I'd like to name email. So let's say this is a description. So next one is name description email. Let's say name email phone. Name email phone. You know what? I'd like to add reload this a little bit. So name email phone. So let's make it 4. So in this, basically the columns layout basically are 12 columns. Okay, so if you put a 4, that means 12 columns. So they're going to be placed in one row. Okay, so the first one is a name, email, and phone, and the next two. So if we add another column, it's going to be pushed to another new row. Okay, so here I'd like to put the description, and so here I'd like to put 6 description and address, and I'd like to change it to the same rows, so make it looks like nicer a little bit. And after we added an address, we'd like to add the toSelect, which is the remember the city and the state. So as you can see here, it is very easy for you to lay out your form very easily. Okay, so you don't need to repeat all of this code again and again and again, because this is components. You can reuse these components anywhere you like. So that's the magic. So let's save it and see. We don't need to save it. We only need to reload the page, and we should be able to see the update. Right? We have name, we have email, we have phone, we have description, we have address, we have city and states. You know what? I'd like to add some margins because it looks like there is no space between the components. So to do that, I only need to do a class of, not class, margin bottom 3. Okay, so basically let's make a copy of all of this and add it to these columns. It should fix the issue, I have to say. So let me try to reload the page. Give it a little bit of space. So there is a little margin button here, margin button and a margin button. And finally, let's add another div. So let's call it, you know what? We don't need to use this. We only need to add a button here for the form submit. So maybe we can find a button here. Where is my button? So let's try this one. There is a commit button here. Okay. Copy this div. So this button is a submit button, and let's say create new customer. So this is our form. In here we can use a, okay, so right now let's just check the result and let me show you next step. So we can send the data from the front end to the back end, and because we have a button to click, right? So right now if I click on this button, it's going to submit the form and it's going to bring you to this page. This is not what we are looking for, okay? So let's go back. Create new customer. So basically I'm going to bind a function here, bind an event, so basically a submit event for this form, and I'm going to prevent, add a prevent modifier here to prevent the form to submit, just like this. If we click on this button, the form is basically submitted, okay? We want to prevent this event, default event. And then we're going to call a function to create a customer, create customer, maybe create customer, okay. So this function right now is not defined yet. So maybe not new customer, create customer is always a new customer. Okay, so let's define this function in Vue.js index file. Remember, in this view, in this object here, we have a method. We actually add two functions here. So this function is going to be a async function, or just right now, just to create a function like this. Let me show you how to grab the data from the form. So it is very handy here in Vue. Okay, so let me console.log this dot customer form data. So let's check what we can get from this form data. Let's reload the page and let me show you what kind of data we get from the application here. So let's open the console. Let's clear it a little bit. So let's put my name here and put my email address here and put my phone here, which is a random number, description, YouTube, no address, Shenzhen. Okay, so this is drop down, and this is I don't know why I cannot see a select button there. That's weird. So you can select any value you like. So if I click on this button, okay, property or method create customer is not defined in the instance. Create customer, let's find. This is a function. We do have this function. And we do have this function prevent. This is beard. Okay, you know what? Because this is this function is basically in this component. So and this function is defined here. So that's the issue, because this function should be defined here. Okay, so let's make a copy of this file. But the problem here is we can use a function called, let's try to search emit. We can emit an event. Okay, we copy this line of code here. So this is a little bit confusing if you're using components. Okay, so basically I'm going to emit a function called here create customer. So basically this is this event is emitted from the components, okay, and then we're going to catch this event in our index file, so which is here. So at create customer, and here we're going to call the function create customer. So I am not very sure if this is going to solve the issue. Let me try it. Customer data is not defined. Okay. I believe I missed something. Create customer. Where is my components? I need to get rid of these components here. Not components, the method. So let's try to reload the page. I'm going to solve this issue, I think. Okay, so let's try to do this submission again. YouTube, address, Japan, submit. So right now, as you can see, it's a log with remember the function. The function here is console log this customer form data, and in the log, as you can see, for the address, we have Shenzhen is this value, right? And for the city, you got the value Shenzhen is this. Yeah, why we got two Shenzhen? Okay, this is for the address and this is for the city, and you should be able to see all the for the form. Okay, you see the value is a phone, right? And the name also, you get the data very easily. And for the value is my name here. So that means we can access the form data here very easily, right? And we can send this data back to our backend. So Google script.run. So this function is going to call create customer, which is not defined, I think. And we're going to pass, let's say const data is equal to an object, and then we're going to grab all the data from this form. Okay, so object dot entries this dot customer form data for each, and we can get the key and the value from the object. Okay, so if we are using this entries function here, we can get the keys and the values, basically destructure this array. And if key is not equal to ID, because for new item, remember here we have an ID property here, but for new item we don't need to, the ID is generated at the backend, so we don't need to pass this ID to the backend. Okay, so we get rid of this ID. So if it's not equal to ID, we add the data. So data key equal to value dot. So this value. So this is pretty weird. So maybe let's say this is item. Okay, key item dot value. So basically we loop through the object. I mean this object. So if the item is ID, we ignore it. If the ID is a name, we get the name. We get the value from this name item. Okay, so basically name dot value, description dot value. So in that way, where is my function? Okay, so in this way, we basically save the item value to this data object, and this data, we're going to use it to create a new customer. Okay, so let's pass it back to the backend. So JSON string find data. So this function is going to create what function? It's going to create a new customer at our backend. So I think this function is not yet created. So before we create this function, let's make sure we get the correct data. So let's console.log the data object here. So you will see what kind of data we can get from this function here. So let's get rid of this line, and let's try to reload the page and try to do another submission here. So Upwork, my email, phone number, YouTube, address is located in Paris, city, let's say where? Okasa, cannot remember. No, to Paris. Let's say France, and that we can create a customer. So if you check, let's clear it and do this again. We have address, right? We have city, description, email, name, phone, and state. So we get all the data from the front end, and we only need to send this data to backend. So let's complete the backend function, which is where is my function? Okay, this line of code, Google script run. So this is the backend function we're going to run. Okay, so at this API part, I'd like to create a function here called create item. Okay, so this function is going to take a sheet name as the first property, another property, a parameter, And the second parameter is going to be the data object. Okay. So here I'm designing this function as a general function. Okay. So basically, if you have a customer tab, we can create a new customer. If you have a user tab, we can create a user. But the user object may be a little bit different from this customer. Maybe your user have a column which is not exist in our customer table. Okay, so and our function here, let's say const create item is equal to api.create item, and we pass a sheet name and a data JSON or JSON data. So sheet name, and this is the JSON data. Okay, so here, since this is JSON data, I like to parse. So const data is equal to JSON.string, not string file, parse the JSON data. And I'd like to get the worksheet. So basically this dot worksheet ss. Where is my object? Okay, this app. Okay, I call it database. This database.get sheet by name. So basically this is we pass the sheet name here. So basically this function is going to get the tab or the table in the database. So basically which is the customer if we pass customer as a sheet name. Okay, so we can copy this line of code. So if worksheet is not found, so let's move this to here. So just in case we cannot find this sheet name, we just throw an error. So if we do have this table in our database, we grab the data and we get the headers and values or records just like this. So we can copy these two lines of code. Okay, so we get the headers and the records, and then we create the keys with these headers. So this function, we use it before, remember? And we need to, first of all, we need to generate ID, okay? So we can create a function to do that. So create or generate new ID. So we need to pass something here. We need to pass the keys and the values or records. So if records or length is equal to 0, that means there is no record, so we only return 1. Okay, so that's going to be the first record. So if we do have records, so let's say const last record is equal to records.pop. I'm going to pop the last records. I don't want to use the pop. Okay, records. Last one is going to be records.length -1. So in this way, we're going to get the last records, and we need to get the ID, the index of ID. So which is going to be the keys index of ID. Okay, because you may place the ID in another column. Okay, so just in case you put it not always at the first column. So this index could be anywhere. Okay, but remember you need to make sure the column is with lowercase ID, not lowercase, because I'm going to convert it here. Not sure. No, lowercase. Yes, we didn't convert header to lowercase. So make sure the ID have a header with lowercase id. So in this way, we can get the last id, const last id, which is equal to last record and the index of id. So we get the id and we return last id plus 1. Right? We increase the last id by 1. So in this way, we generate a new id. So this dot generate new id. So we get a new id, and let's const row content or new record is equal to keys.map. So basically, this key is a list of basically the header. Okay, if your header is like this, it's going to have keys of ID, name, description like that, and then we can map these keys, and we can map this key, and we also have an index. So we can check if key is equal to ID, we return ID. Okay, so if the column of the header, if the header is ID, we return this ID we just generated, right? So this is going to generate a new ID for this new record. If it's not, we can return where is my data? So if it's not, we use the data and we pass the key, and we don't even need to use this index here. This data is the object we pass from the front end. Remember, if the header is address, we get the address value, which is Paris, right? If the key is the city, we get the city value, and we pass it here. Okay, we basically map everything from this data object and put it into this new record, and this new record we're going to be array. And so this is a new record, and we need to worksheet.append worksheet. Okay, it's not a worksheet. Append row. That's weird. This is database, I think. Append row. Okay. When I delete this database, something's very weird. So we're going to append the row data, which is basically the new record, to our database, right? And finally, let's return something. Return JSON.stringify. So we have a function called create item object with keys and values. So we basically create. So this dot create keys and values. The value is going to be the new record. So maybe let me show you what the data looks like. So const new customer, or new item, or item equal to this create, and JSON stringify this and return back to the front end. So this is the return result, and this is the item. I'd like to log it out here, so you will see, you will test it here. So let's try to test a function. You know what? So let's try to test here. Function test. So let's say const ship name is equal to customer, and we're going to have a data. Let's say we have a name, Ashton, and email. Test. I need some space. So we can run this function. So API dot create item, and customer, customer, and JSON.stringify the data object. Okay, so let's try to run this test function. So for now, I only added a name and an email, but you can add more properties for your new customer object. Sheet name is not defined. Line 68, create item. Okay, so here it's array function. So let's try to run this again. Property length of undefined 35. Record, create new item. Okay, I need to pass the keys and records here. So it's better to test every function you just created. Just make sure your function is working fine. So as you can see here, I have this 100 created, right? And other properties which are undefined. So if you check the database here, I should have the data created successfully. So let's get rid of this line. So that means the function is working now, right? And we can use it. We can try it at our front end. So get item, get rid of this console dialog. So maybe we can do something here. So basically, if the item is not passed here, I'd like to convert it to, so if has on property key, so if basically if this key is found in this property, I'd like to return the data key, else I'd like to return a null value. Okay, so let's try to test again to make sure we don't have any undefined value in our returned object. Why it's kind of slow? Okay, I think I missed the console, the log, but it should work like this way. So let's try to use this function at our front end. I redesigned this function a little bit because we don't have a function called create customer, but we have a function called create item. So this item could be a customer and it could be a user. So basically, it depends on what kind of data you define in your database. Okay, so it basically is the more general function here. We can create any item in our database. So let's go to the front end and replace this function. So create customer. So here we create item and we pass the customer. I hope I didn't spell it wrong. And this is the data. You know what? So if this with success handler, we're going to get the response from the backend. And I'd like to console.log the response. The response is basically, and if an error, so with failure handler, I'm going to take an error object, and also we're going to console error, and this one going to JSON.parse, because the result we returned is string find. So if you check the API, the data is the item is string find. Okay. So I think this way we have the so we can send our data from the front end to back end. So let's try it. Let's reload the page. So let's put my name here, add address, let's add a phone number here, description, this is a test from front end. Address is where put something here for the city, Okasa, state, China, Japan. So let's create the order. Okay, we got an issue here. So create item API 65. That means we have error at our API at line 65. JSON data. So if you see an error like this, and let me check, it's not a success. And you can check the log here in this execution. Okay, as you can see, we did run this function, but we got an error. And we can check what's going on here. So sheet name is not defined. Sheet name is not defined at API 6541. Line 65, sheet name is not defined. 65, where is my 65? Okay, that's a terrible mistake. I need to pass the variable here for this function, okay, and the JSON data. And this should fix the issue. Just like this function, I need to pass because this is arrow function, so it looks like a little bit weird here. Okay, it's loaded. Let's try to do it again. Let's do it quick. YouTube, address, no address, city, China, create a customer. I hope this time, Jay, you know what? In last video, I also did something like this. JSON is not defined. I don't know, no. JSON, you know, here JSON. So at least we have this record created successfully. You see, 100, record 100. So it should work. YouTube, another test. City, Japan, create, and in the log, you have the ID 101 name, or this information from the backend, right? So that's almost about this video. So the main part for this video is like this, and now what the other part? I think the main part for this video is done. So basically, I just show you how to build the core functions and how to connect your form with the backend. Okay, you can do something like this. And the next thing we need to do, I'd like to, you know what? I'd like to remember we hide this section here. So I'd like to show them. So if I try to show them, they're looking something different. So you have a table here, and you have a form here, but this is not what we are looking for, right? So right now this part is mainly focused on the front end. You need to organize your application a little bit for your end users. So I'd like to add a button here. If you click on this button, I'd like to show a pop-up or dialog, which is this form included in this dialog, and you can create a new customer like that way. Okay, so this is what I'm trying to do here. So first of all, I need to create a button, right? So where can I add a button? So let's add the div here, class called row, and close it. and add the div here, class of column or column auto. Let's copy a button. So copy a button, not a subject, just a button. Okay, not a submit button, just a button. No margin. Here, no margin. BTM primary. Let's say create customer or add new customer. So this is a button. So if I reload the page, so this is our button here. So it's layout not very good, but we can fix later. And then we need to add a function here called click on click. I'd like to show customer forms, to show new customer form. Okay, so if we click on this button, I'd like to call this function to show to pop up the dialog. So this is what I'm going to do. You can have multiple ways to do it, but this is just my style here. So go to the Vue.js index file, and in this method, I'd like to create a function here. Maybe before this create new customer, I'd like to add a new function here to show the dialog. Okay, so let's change the form to a dialog. We have a component called model. This is something look like a dialog. Okay, so we only need to change it to a dialog like this. Okay, so if we click on this button, it show you a dialog like this, but we only need to replace this with our form, right? So you know what? Maybe I can replace this button, and we don't need to use this function here to show the customer form. That's the magic for Bootstrap. So let's replace this button here. So type button, and target, let's say example model, let's say new customer form. I just changed the ID. Okay, so let's say add new customer. Let's format this a little bit. So, and go back to our components in our form here. So right now this is a form, but I'd like to wrap it in a dialog like this. So I think I can copy this part and only need to add this our form here, I think. So let's copy this part. I think I can make a copy all of them, and we can place it here, and here is our form. Let's cut this part and put it here. Okay, so for this part we don't need it. This is a footer, but you also can use it if you want to use this footer. So let me try to do a little bit of reorganization. So I need to move this form tag back to, I think, body footer. So you need to move it here. And let's get rid of this form. I think it's here. I hope we didn't do anything wrong here. So we can replace this button. So this save changes, we can put it here. So this is the button. And this button is going to close this form, okay? But we need to change the ID. This ID, we define it here, so let's copy this ID. So make sure I didn't do something wrong here. So this is the ID. Not sure if this is the only one. Okay. Label. I think this is not necessary. And for this title, I'd like to say this is a new customer. Okay. And let's see. Let's check if this is going to work. So this is going to save you a lot of time if you are trying to create a front-end web application like this, because it seems like it's working, but it's not perfect. You know what? Because right now it's the layout. I think it's a layout issue. But you know what? I think we can change the size of this dialog. Where is the size? So let's do a size. So optional size. So by default, which is 500 pixels. So let's change it to large. So model LG. So let's just apply this class to this model. And I think I can do something else. So let's try to do it again. New customer. Why this is not working? I think something is wrong when I'm trying to rearrange the content here. So this is class row. I need to get rid of this class row. So this is model header, model content, model body. And then for this body, I'd like to apply a class row for this model body. And then in this model body, we have our content here. And we can apply our style, or not style, the layout of our form, right? Try to do it again. So right now it's working fine. And this button, I think I add a margin or something like that, so it's not aligned well. So let's check what's going on here. So it's a margin issue. And let's close this. Since we have a close button here, so I don't need to have this close button here. And let's try to reload this a little bit. Reload. So it looks like not perfect, but it looks like correct. Okay, I cannot find a word to describe this. So you can create customer. So you know what? I'd like to so basically if this created successfully, I'd like to run this function again, maybe to reload the page. I'm not sure. Maybe in next video. I think this is long enough for this video. So let's just try to test if this is working or not. So let's say this is still my name, and I put my phone here. Description. Let's say this is a test from dialog. Copy this line. So change cd create customer. So something is didn't happen here, but I think the data is already created. So if I reload the page, you can see here the data is created, but I need to have a function to close the dialog. We have a function here, let's say toggle or height. So we grab so maybe in the next part I'm going to improve the front end a little bit, because right now we don't have any, like the data is loading, so when you're trying to submit the form, nothing is happening here. Maybe you need to disable this button here. So let me show you. I'd like to, so basically very few, so here we have a loading, right? We have a loading here. But we cannot use it in the components, I think. So here, after we create customer. So after we create it, we'd like to close. Where is my, let's copy this code. So this is how we get a reference to the dialog, right? So let's say this is a form that remember the ID, new customer form. So we add it here. So we get the element by ID new customer form, so which is going to get the ID. For the options, no options here. So you have 3 options here. Backdrop, keyboard, something like that. So by default, they're all true. Okay. And I'd like to close height. So we can use this function height and form.height. So that means we know the new record is created successfully. So let's try it. And just reload the page. Maybe I need to position center, vertical center. So model dialog vertical centered. Okay, we can add a class here to our dialog. So dialog to center our form a little bit. So let's do it again. You know what, this part is not very important. You just need time to do it. And if you are not very familiar, like me, I'm not very familiar with the Bootstrap, so I'm just using this as a tool. If you're very familiar with Bootstrap, this should be very quickly for you to do it, okay, for the front end part. So let's try to create a new customer. Let's say this type, let's call it Google. And test Paris, France, and create customer. I'm not sure if this is going to close this dialog. Let's see. This looks like it's not working, but I think that at the back end it's working, but I didn't see any errors. Bootstrap. Okay, so I need to const. So I think the last test, not sure if it's going to work or not, but I think in this video, the core function here, I did it, and if you can follow the steps I did here, it should do the work for you. Okay. So let's just submit, because we didn't apply any verification here for the form. So the data is created, but I don't know why this line of code is just not working. Maybe I'm going to check it offline, and I'm going to explain it in the next video. And I think this is long enough for a video. And for the part B, I think it's also enough for you guys to take some time to do this kind of practice. And we'll see you in the next part. Of course, we're going to have next part, maybe next part after next part. All right, so that's it for this video. I hope you can keep working on this project, and I'm also going to keep working on this project, and you should be able to learn the basic of a CRUD application like this. If you are trying to use Google Sheet as a database and use Google Apps Script to build a web application for yourself, and this could be a very good chance for you to learn about it. And if you can do this part, and you can scale your project, maybe in a larger project, and have multiple tables of multiple database tables here in your database, and you can build some relationship between them. It can go to very complex. Okay, I need to say, but in this example here, I only show you how to build the core functions here. You can create items, you can read items from the backend, you can update, you can delete. So right now we complete. The first part is about the read. Okay, you read data from the backend, and in this video I only complete this part, so create. So this is C part. Maybe in the next part I'm going to show you how to update an item and the delete item. Delete item is quite simple, I have to say. Okay, so that's it for part B, and I'm going to see you in the next one. See you later.